Recording this solo episode October 8th. I plan to put it out in a few months, sometime in December towards the end of the year. Um, I'm recording it to talk about a recent trench story. If you have not grabbed my book yet, Out of the Trenches, Stories of Resilient Educators, in December it will have been out already 2 years. And I do talk about some of the earlier trench stories in my career in the book in chapter 1 and 2. However, most recent trench story is probably the biggest trench story of them all. Um, and just to preface the trench story, 3 weeks ago, September 16th, I left the position. Um, I had been in the position since the beginning of the 23-24 school year. I gave it 6 weeks of the 24-25 school year and then knew that it was not sustainable for me to stay there. Um, Without getting into too much detail, um, the school was a high needs school. Um, I was walking into a culture that was already very toxic. Um, there have been administrative changes um, over the past couple of years. When I came at the beginning of the 23-24 school year, they were on their second year with a principal that staff already did not like. I found out quickly there were a lot of systems and structures that weren't in place. A colleague and I were working as what we call CLDE mentors, working with the multilingual learner population. So we had to make sure students were placed in the correct classes for English learners, and also the teachers were coached. So a lot of what happened at the beginning of last school year was just making sure kids were in the correct levels of English learning for their acquisition of language. And then a lot of the professional development my colleague and I did was centered around um, the professional development we facilitated was centered around uh, structures to do translanguaging and not translation, because teachers who had been at the school for a number of years did a lot of Google translating um, of their materials, even though students had been in the country for a couple of years. Um, so that was some of our coaching points with the teachers. Coaching did not really get off the ground much last year, however, due to just some of the systems that weren't in place from the previous person in our position, and just the district wasn't really, I guess, holding us accountable as much for having a coaching cycle. I did work with about 7 teachers last year um, on a regular basis, kind of on my own without that district support. But this year they were doing more intentional uh, centered coaching from the district to the school, to the mentor that was at the school, myself, and then to the teachers. Now, that part of the job in and of itself was a good learning opportunity to work with teachers centered around instructional strategies for multilingual learners. So I was happy to do that and happy to learn more about the WIDA framework and working with supports in social studies, math, and language arts and science. Some of the things that were very frustrating to me at the beginning of the 24-25 school year were that the ELD position that they had a full-time opening for was never reposted after the end of May. It was posted for a week, and then the principal didn't bother hiring anybody or trying to repost it. So there were 8 teachers who were given a class of ELD the day before school started, or the same day school started. Um, and were not given any previous warning. This was something that was not within my control because I was not doing the master schedule. The master schedule was actually outsourced to somebody else that worked in the district, not even at the school, even though one of the assistant principals at the school could have done that master schedule. The principal decided to outsource that. So, um, due to these teachers getting a class of ELD, it was one of their 5 classes they taught. So it wasn't an extra class, but there were a couple of brand new teachers that got this class. So, of course, the support from my end was going to be increasing, but we did have another person in my particular position as well. Um, but I did see the reaction to the teachers who were given this extra class as being very frustrated, of course, not getting any heads up during the interview that there was a possibility they would have to teach a class of ELD. I saw one teacher left pretty much on the spot and when they were told that. And then in short succession before I left, there were 2 more teachers who left. Um, and that could have been due to structured systems. I know one teacher left due to student behaviors in the classroom. So that was also a piece that having worked in admin and been somebody who had been supporting teachers in previous positions. This was more of an instructional leadership job. In previous roles, I've done more the discipline and attendance role. Um, but I was clear to stay my lane in this particular role. But I just saw how there was not really any support given to teachers with disciplinary issues and helping remove kids from the classroom and those types of things. There was a support email you could send, but that would be um, so when they sent this email, it often took a half an hour for anybody to come, and then sometimes nobody came, despite multiple infractions that the students did. So I was hearing this from teachers around me, and I felt powerless um, to support them, other than um, talking with them about some of the students that they had that were kind of, so to speak, on my caseload. Um, this was brought up with the principal at the end of August. And uh, we were both basically, myself and my colleague in the same position from last year, were basically um, said that we, as kind of the coaches for the multilingual learners, should have come up with a discipline strategy for multilingual learners. And that should have been done last year. This is being said at the end of August this year. So anyway, um, that was in hindsight. And in any case, as I said, I was clear to stay my lane. I was not a dean, and I wasn't working in a role that was giving kids disciplinary consequences. And this particular was more instructional leadership. So, um, but that kind of added obviously to teachers' frustration and just toxicity within the building. There were a lot of teachers who were um, just negative in the hallways. They were burnt out very easily, um, and it was just a kind of repeat of the same staff culture as last year, even though 75% of the teachers were new this school year. And if you take into account that I was the 4th certified staff member to leave by 6 weeks in, that would add up to over 80% of staff who left from the time I had started at the school um, in July of 2023. Another piece that was frustrating to me is that we do a TEL survey, or not TEL, that's students. It's a climate and culture survey, basically, in Colorado every other year about staff, basically well-being at work. And that was done, I think, in February, March. And the results of positive reviews were at below 20%, compared to 2022 when there was another principal when the results of positive reviews were over 80%. And this is public knowledge. You can look it up um, on the Colorado Department of Ed website. I don't know, if you take into account all the turnover, take into account the survey results and the amount of students who also choice enrolled out of the school during the open enrollment period last spring. The fact that they kept the same leadership in place, that was just very frustrating to me. And the union also had very many um, grievances that were brought up. So yeah, so I guess I could say I started the year thinking, maybe there'd be some change. I don't know. Um, I started it with good intentions, and I did weigh the options of, what would happen if I left and didn't have anything else lined up. Um, so that's where I am now, October 8th. I've interviewed for a couple of things, but they haven't worked out. So I'm kind of in limbo. I'll continue to do my speaking and podcasting. I hope to be in a school sometime in the school year. But a lot of the time, also when you interview, you just don't know unless you know the principal personally, and then you know that they're a good person and a good leader. But if you don't know the person, then you really don't know what you're walking into. And something that I felt guilty about shortly after leaving this position was um, kind of what I was leaving on the other two people in my role. I did leave things organized in the drive and left instructions and all that, but I also felt guilty about, like, I financially could leave, as opposed to other people who couldn't, especially all these new hires. Some of them had moved from out of state to work. So, they were stuck there the rest of the school year. Um, in my book, I write about one other position um, about 21 years ago. And that position I did leave about 3 months in. And the school was a private school and it ended up being in existence anymore. Basically, it lasted maybe 5 more years beyond when I worked there. Um, and then there was another position I started um, here in Colorado at one point, and I was walking into a bad situation. So I found out from people that were in the department that what had happened to prior to me coming, and I lasted 2 weeks just because it was something they should have told me during the interview, basically. So I didn't really feel bad about that resignation. I think in this particular situation, it hits harder. It is a process, especially when you feel like, I was making somewhat of an impact within the realm of what I had control over. However, I think just some of these other factors that played into the whole larger school community and just the staff negativity, and everybody just, in my mind, was miserable. Maybe I was more miserable than a lot of them. I don't know, but just wasn't a good place to be psychologically. And I felt like if I stayed there, I would just continue to be grumpy and angry at the situation. So, um, anyway, that's a trench story. I don't usually tell the trench stories, it's always the guest. So I'm putting this out, in a couple months, a good 3 months after the event itself. So if you have any comments, um, or if you've experienced something like this yourself, feel free to send me an email or tag me at Dana Goodier or Out of Trenches PC. Um, what surprised me, having had so many conversations with people about teacher burnout and educator well-being on the podcast, is the fact that This was a place where educators were crying out for help. They were going to the union. They were, um, talking with a few administrators who were trustworthy and on their side. But those administrators were not able to have any influence on the principal. And it just, it kind of goes to show, even though we focus more on teacher well-being in general, since the pandemic, it's not like that everywhere. And there are a lot of schools, unfortunately, where um, admin or the leader of the school is hired because of connections. Um, and this person had not even been a finalist for the job. And a couple of the people who had been assistant principals at the school for a long time were up for the job and were not given the job. So, anyway, that's kind of all I was going to say on this topic. It's it was a trench, I would say. I'm out of that trench. Um, it's not easy being in limbo and leaving when there is no other offer and leaving at an odd time of year. But I just knew I kept saying I could last another month or I could last whatever amount of time. But I even knew when I started that position, um, in the 23-24 school year, I am surprised I made it through last year. So, thank you for listening.